He called her just the secretary, but she was the reason he never fell apart. Helen Moore didn't ask for much, not recognition, not praise, just a little kindness, a little dignity, for 7 years. She worked in silence, watching others rise while she stayed still. She knew everyone's schedules, but no one ever asked about hers. She remembered their preferences, allergies, holidays, but no one remembered her middle name. Until one day, someone saw through the silence, and everything she thought she'd buried, her voice, her fire, her worth rose again. This is not just a story of unspoken love. It's about what happens when a woman reclaims the parts of herself the world taught her to hide. Have you ever been told you were just something, just a helper, just a support, just background noise? Then this story is your mirror. If you've ever felt small in someone else's world, tell us in the comments. Your story matters too. Now, let's begin the powerful CEO who never noticed his secretary until she was in someone else's arms. Every morning, Helen Moore arrived before everyone else. She walked the quiet halls of Whitaker Medical Group like a shadow the lights hadn't yet touched. By the time the rest of the office filtered in, grumbling about traffic or discussing weekend plans, Helen had already brewed 2 pots of coffee, set the boardroom for the morning meeting, and placed color-coded folders on her boss's desk, aligned perfectly to the edge. Not once in 7 years had anyone truly seen her. She was 36. But in the fluorescent silence of the office, Helen often felt older, like a reliable clock on the wall, always ticking, always there, but rarely noticed. Her wardrobe was neutral and practical: charcoal cardigans, beige flats, slacks that held no shape. Her hair, once soft and wild in her college years, was now pulled into a low twist every day with the same tortoiseshell clip. No lipstick, just chapstick and a thin layer of morning composure. People in the office knew her name, at least in theory. They called her Helen when asking about printer paper, when scheduling meetings, or when something needed to be urgently smoothed over. But no one asked where she was from. No one knew she had a degree in communications, or that she once dreamed of designing health campaigns that could reach underserved communities. Dreams, like dresses from another decade, sometimes no longer fit. Helen lived alone in a modest townhouse 15 minutes from the office. Her closest companion was a gray tabby named Ollie, who greeted her each evening with yawns and slow tail flicks. Her mother, now in her early 70s, lived nearby in an assisted living center. Helen visited twice a week, bringing cinnamon rolls and stories. The staff always said her mother enjoyed, even on the days she didn't remember who Helen was. Her life was measured in routine: Monday reports, Wednesday calls, Friday calendar reviews. There was comfort in the rhythm, but also a dull ache, like standing outside in winter sunlight, bright, but never warm. She hadn't been on a vacation in 4 years, not since her last serious relationship ended quietly, and with more silence than shouting. He had called her steady, like it was a compliment. Then one day, he stopped calling altogether. The relationship fizzled the same way she did, without anyone noticing. That Tuesday morning began like any other. She arrived at 7:08 a.m., wiped down the meeting room table, replaced an old dry erase marker, and sent a gentle reminder to the procurement team about an overdue supply order. Her boss, Grant Whitaker, wouldn't arrive until closer to 8:30, which gave her time to quietly prep for his 9 a.m. strategy session. At 8:02, her inbox pinged. It was a company-wide email from the new HR director, a cheerful message about workplace wellness and an upcoming team-building hike. Helen scanned the email quickly until her eyes froze near the bottom. Special thanks to our executive assistant, Ellen Moore, for helping coordinate logistics. Ellen, again, it was the 3rd time this year. Different departments, different writers, but always the same mistake. A small error, tiny, even, one misplaced letter, one person less seen. She stared at the name for a moment longer than she meant to. Not with anger, Helen didn't waste energy on that, but with the hollow sting of confirmation. She replied politely, as always, gently correcting the spelling. No response came. At 10:47, someone from the legal team stopped by her desk with a quick, "Helen, could you print that lease file again?" At 11:32, a new intern walked past her 3 times before realizing she wasn't the receptionist. At 12:15, she ate a turkey sandwich alone at her desk. Later that afternoon, she helped fix the office printer jam, then sat in on a strategy call where she was never acknowledged by name, but took all the notes regardless. By 6:10 p.m., most of the office had emptied out. Helen tidied the kitchenette, turned off the boardroom lights, and gathered her things. As she slipped on her coat and checked her phone, no new texts, no missed calls. She paused at the glass door leading to the hallway. Her reflection stared back at her, half illuminated by the exit sign behind. Hair pulled back, blazer buttoned, calm eyes, lips pressed into a practiced line. She exhaled. If she didn't come in tomorrow, if she didn't send the reminder emails, if she didn't fix the copier or set the meeting table or print the agendas, would anyone actually notice? Would anyone care beyond the brief inconvenience of her absence that night? After feeding Ollie and changing into sweatpants, Helen sat down with a cup of tea and opened her laptop. The email was still open. Ellen Moore. It sat there, indifferent and oblivious. She hovered the mouse over the signature line. For a moment, she imagined deleting her name entirely. No correction, no polite reminder, just silence. Let them wonder why the coffee wasn't made or why the lights were still off in the boardroom. But she didn't. Instead, she corrected it again. Kindly, professionally, quietly, because that's what Helen Moore did. Then she closed the laptop, reached down to scratch behind Ollie's ears, and let the quiet of the evening settle in around her. She didn't expect fireworks in life, but sometimes she wondered if she disappeared tomorrow. Would the silence be any different and more than that? Would anyone even hear it? Grant Whitaker built a healthcare empire but forgot how to build a life. At 45, he lived like a man who had traded one kind of richness for another. His schedule was always full, his inbox constantly active, and his office never messy. But his house echoed at night, and his life, beneath the professional sheen, was as empty as the parking lot he often pulled into before sunrise. He was the face of Whitaker Medical Group, a name passed down from his father, Richard, a visionary in his time. Grant had modernized it, expanded it, reshaped it to fit a new era. Under his watch, the company had grown to national prominence. He'd made headlines for launching free clinic initiatives in rural counties, for investing in early cancer detection tools, for always being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. What no one ever mentioned, because no one dared ask, was that Grant had stopped smiling around the same time Elena died. Elena. She had been everything his world quietly revolved around: smart, luminous, gently irreverent. She had grounded him when ambition threatened to spin him out. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it had been deeply rooted, real. And when her diagnosis came, it felt like the ground beneath him had been sawed through. He had done everything, consulted the best specialists, paid for experimental treatments, sat through nights on hospital chairs, but none of it had mattered. She had been gone for 5 years now. In that time, Grant didn't date, didn't attend social events unless required, and never, not once, let anyone close enough to ask how he was really doing. Instead, he built walls with policy decks and annual reports. He buried grief under spreadsheets. He grew the company like it was the only thing left that made sense. People said he was brilliant, focused, exacting. They were right. They just left out the part about him being lonely. Even his closest staff saw only the professional veneer. He kept conversations short, emails shorter, and his face unreadable. He didn't believe in praising what should be expected. If people did their jobs well, that was enough. Take Helen Moore, for example. She had been his executive assistant for 7 years. Reliable, precise, discreet. She managed his calendar like a chessboard, every move thoughtful, every piece in place. She made problems disappear before they reached his desk. She printed his board reports on linen paper because she remembered his offhand comment about how standard copy stock made things feel cheap. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but he never said so. He couldn't remember the last time he looked her in the eye. Maybe the first year she was hired, or perhaps that brief exchange in the elevator when his car had broken down. In any case, whatever warmth or connection had once existed between them had long been replaced by cool efficiency. He texted her instructions. Board deck needs edits. Reschedule 3 p.m. Add call WBA Lawson to Friday. She always responded promptly, always followed through. No questions. No reminders. It was, by all accounts, the ideal professional relationship, until it wasn't. Tuesday morning, while skimming through his week ahead, Grant paused at a calendar invite flagged in bold, National Healthcare Leadership Summit, Chicago, RSVP confirmed, travel scheduled, underneath it, in italics, reminder gala attendance requires registered guest, press coverage confirmed. His jaw tightened. He had hoped to skip that part. The summit itself was fine panels, policy talks, investor briefings, all within his comfort zone. But the gala, that was another story. It was formal, heavily photographed, and worst of all, social. The kind of event where attendees were expected to bring someone, not just for optics, but for appearances of stability, connection, humanity. He'd gone to this very event with Elena years ago. He could still picture her in that navy silk dress, brushing lint from his lapel before they walked into the ballroom. They had danced once that night. Just once. It was slow and quiet, tucked into the back corner of the floor. But he remembered it more vividly than any business pitch he'd made that year. Since her passing, he had avoided any event that hinted at partnership. But now, he couldn't. The press would be there, investors. Grant showing up alone again might read as isolated, inflexible, out of touch. He opened his phone contacts, scrolled. One woman had moved across the country. Another had ghosted him after a single awkward dinner. A third was already married, and the rest felt too complicated, too inappropriate, too performative. What he needed was someone he could trust, someone who wouldn't turn it into something it wasn't, someone poised, calm, predictable, unthreatening. His eyes drifted to the office glass door. Through the frosted panel, he could just make out the silhouette at the front desk, shoulders squared, posture straight, hands dancing across the keyboard. Helen. She was already planning the logistics for his trip. She probably knew the gala start time better than he did. She wouldn't say the wrong thing. She wouldn't treat it like a date. She was perfect, professional, polished, safe. He hesitated, then typed a quick message. Can you step in for a moment? You need someone with poise, presence, and no risk of scandal. The room fell silent. Then someone said, Helen. It had started with a single phone call, short, apologetic, and infuriating. Grant's original +1 for the Chicago Summit Gala, an industry consultant he had once met at a board retreat, had called to say she wouldn't be able to make it. Something about a scheduling conflict, a family emergency, and a vague promise to catch up soon. Grant didn't argue. He barely listened. He simply ended the call, stared out the window, and let out a breath that tightened his chest on the way out. The gala was 2 days away. He had waited too long to ask anyone else. Not that he had a list. There was no one in his life he saw regularly outside the walls of Whitaker Medical Group. The idea of scrambling now, calling someone unfamiliar, creating the illusion of closeness made his stomach turn. But PR wasn't so willing to let things slide. You can't go alone, said Natalie Reyes, the company's media advisor, as she paced around the small meeting room outside his office. The press is watching. Last year they speculated you were isolating after Elena. This year, you need to look steady, composed, balanced. He gave her a look. This isn't a dating show. No, she said quickly. But public perception is part of the job. Grant, you're the face of this company. People are investing in you as much as your ideas. He rubbed his temples. So, What's your proposal? You need someone with poise, presence, and no risk of scandal. She paused. Someone who knows how to behave in that kind of room, who won't overshadow, but also won't disappear. That's when someone said it, from the corner, quietly, but clearly, Helen. The silence was immediate. Grant looked up from the table. Helen Moore, he repeated. Yes. Natalie nodded. She's discreet, smart, composed. She's already helping coordinate your schedule for the summit. And honestly, she glanced around the room. She knows your routine better than any of us. He didn't respond, not immediately. It was one thing to rely on Helen behind the scenes. It was another to bring her into the spotlight. Not because he doubted her capabilities, but because it blurred the one line he'd never crossed, bringing his professional world into the personal. Or maybe it was the other way around. Still, it was the only option that made sense. Later that afternoon, Helen received the invitation not as a request, but as a formal email from the executive office. She read it twice, then a third time. Request for attendance National Healthcare Summit Gala, Chicago, date Thursday. Attire formal, accompanying Mr. Grant Whitaker. No explanation, no personal note, no warning. She sat back in her chair, blinking. She had spent 7 years mastering the art of invisibility. Her name was rarely in the spotlight, and that was by design. She preferred her position in the quiet corners of strategy. She smoothed edges. She didn't step into the frame, but this was something else. She stared at the screen for a long time, hands still on the keyboard, unsure whether to laugh or panic. That's when she heard the soft chime of the elevator and the unmistakable voice that followed. Helen, her younger sister, Marcy, breezed into the lobby with a grin and a tote bag slung over one shoulder. She looked out of place amid the gray suits and beige walls, like someone had cut her from a brighter magazine and pasted her into the wrong setting. Marcy was a hairstylist by trade, a dreamer by default. The kind of woman who wore red boots in summer and turquoise eyeliner on Mondays. She had texted earlier, saying she'd swing by, but Helen hadn't expected her to show up now. I just came from a client uptown, Marcy said, placing the tote on Helen's desk. And before you ask, yes. I saw the email. Yes, I stalked the calendar. And yes, we are fixing this. Helen blinked, fixing what Marcy raised an eyebrow. You're going to a formal gala as the guest of a nationally recognized CEO. You can't wear one of your work cardigans and hope no one notices. Helen flushed. It's not a date. It's a business event. Marcy gave her a look. Even more reason to look like you belong in that room. That evening, against her better judgment, Helen let Marcy into her apartment and into her closet. What followed was a whirlwind of laughter, judgment, and half-hearted protests. Marcy tossed 2/3 of Helen's clothing onto the bed, declared most of it retirement chic, and then pulled out a navy blue sheath dress Helen had bought years ago but never worn. This, Marcy said, holding it up to the light, is our base. The next hour was a blur. Hair curled into soft waves. Makeup light but elegant. A borrowed pair of heels. A clutch. A little perfume. And finally, contacts, replacing the heavy glasses Helen always used as a shield. When it was done, Helen stepped in front of her mirror and paused. The woman staring back at her had the same eyes, the same lips, but everything else felt foreign, like she was stepping into someone else's life. One where she took up space, one where people might actually look. She touched the necklace Marcy had loaned her, something simple, silver, warm against her skin. "This isn't me," Helen whispered. "No," Marcy said softly, "but maybe it's a part of you you've forgotten." Helen didn't respond. She simply stood there, quiet, wondering. Would any of this matter? Would any of it change how the world saw her, or how he saw her? And more importantly, did she even want it to? He was expecting a secretary. What he saw stole his breath. The ballroom at the Hilton Grand Chicago shimmered beneath a cascade of crystal chandeliers. Soft music floated over the clinking of champagne flutes and the low murmur of conversation. Waiters in white gloves weaved between clusters of suits and evening gowns, and cameras flashed subtly in the corners. Grant had arrived early habit, not intention. He hated these things. The performative networking, the polished smiles. But this event was essential. Half the room represented the future of medical policy in the country. He needed to be seen, shake hands, make quiet promises behind tighter smiles. He was reviewing the evening's agenda near the main entrance when the doorman cleared his throat. "Your guest has arrived, sir." Grant turned without much thought, expecting the familiar outline, the same navy blazer, the quiet walk, the subtle nod of acknowledgement Helen always gave him. But what he saw was something entirely different. Helen stood at the threshold of the ballroom, like a vision from a dream he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Her dress was a simple black classic, elegant, sleeveless, fitted to her form, with a softness that spoke more of grace than glamour. Her hair, once always pinned or twisted, now flowed in soft waves over her shoulders, catching the golden light in a way that made her look almost unreal. No glasses, just those warm hazel eyes, open and searching. And when she saw him, she smiled. Grant forgot to breathe. The woman before him wasn't just his assistant in a different outfit. She wasn't professional Helen in fancy wrapping. She was someone he had never truly looked at before. Not like this. Not fully. And now that he did, he couldn't look away. He stepped forward, suddenly aware of how stiff his own tuxedo felt. "You look," he started, but the words trailed off. It wasn't like him to be at a loss. Helen tilted her head. "Like I showed up in the wrong movie." He blinked, then chuckled soft. "Genuine. Surprised." "I was going to say stunning." She blushed lightly but kept her posture steady. "Thank you. My sister made me do it." "I may owe her a thank you," Grant said before he could stop himself. They walked in together, the air around them filled with silent observations. People turned to look, not at him, he was always recognized, but at her. Some tried to place her. Others simply admired her presence. Helen, for her part, moved with calm assurance. She wasn't flashy, didn't command attention, but there was something unshakably composed in her step. Something grounded. She carried herself like a woman who belonged there, even if the room wasn't built with her in mind. Over the next hour, they mingled. Helen stayed close, but never clung. She greeted people with polite interest, held conversations about healthcare initiatives, and remembered names like she'd been doing this all her life. At one point, she and a senior foundation donor spoke at length about community outreach in low-income neighborhoods. Grant watched from a distance, glass in hand, pretending to listen to a biotech CEO, but his attention was elsewhere. There was a light in Helen's eyes when she spoke about the things she believed in. It was subtle but radiant, passionate, yet poised. He had worked next to this woman for 7 years. How had he never noticed this part of her? Or had she simply never been given the space to let it rise to the surface? As the live jazz band eased into a waltz, the dance floor began to fill. Helen stood near the edge, speaking with a retired hospital director and his wife. Her hands moved gracefully, her laughter soft but clear. That's when a man tall, silver-haired, familiar from earlier panels, approached her with a confident smile and offered his hand. Helen hesitated only briefly, then stepped onto the floor. Grant turned fully now, his expression unreadable. The man led her into the dance with ease. He was clearly experienced, his steps assured. Helen followed effortlessly, her body language open, relaxed. She smiled up at her partner, an easy, delighted smile that crinkled her eyes. One Grant had never seen before. It hit him in a quiet, unmistakable wave. She looked happy, not content, not useful, not efficient, but alive, seen, lit from within. He felt something shift inside his chest, a tension he hadn't even known he carried. It wasn't jealousy, exactly, not yet. It was something softer, deeper, more unnerving. He had assumed he knew who she was, the woman who organized his calendar, who left post-it reminders, who never made small talk unless prompted, who blended into the structure of his day so seamlessly that she became part of the furniture. But this was a woman he didn't know at all, and he couldn't help but wonder what else had he missed, just as Grant started to truly see her. Someone else already had. The music drifted through the ballroom like honey, soft, golden, and just a little too slow. Grant stood at the edge, holding a half-empty glass of something he hadn't tasted. His eyes locked on the pair gliding across the floor. Helen moved with such grace, it stunned him again. But it was her partner who finally claimed his attention. Tall, confident, his salt and pepper hair just long enough to look intentional. A tuxedo that fit too well to be borrowed. He was speaking as they danced. Grant could tell by the way Helen tilted her head to listen, then laughed in that quiet way she did when genuinely charmed. They moved as though they had done this before, and in a way they had. Dr. Ethan Park. Grant recognized the name from the attendee list. A former medical researcher turned healthcare innovator, founder of a fast-growing startup that focused on patient-centered technology. He had spoken earlier at the summit with surprising warmth for a man surrounded by tech. Even then, Grant had noticed the way people leaned in when Ethan spoke. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he made people feel as though they mattered. Apparently, Helen was no exception. As the music shifted to a livelier beat, Helen and Ethan stepped off the floor. He offered her a drink from a passing tray, and they settled into a quiet corner near the balcony doors. Grant wasn't proud of what he did next. He lingered just near enough to hear, not close enough to intrude, but enough to catch fragments. "I couldn't believe it was you," Ethan was saying. "It's been, 15 years since that student roundtable in Boston." Helen's voice soft, amused. 16, technically. "But who's counting I am?" Ethan replied, smiling. "You asked a question that silenced an entire panel of professors. I remember thinking, that woman's going to change things." Helen laughed, quieter this time. "I think I scared them more than changed them. Still," Ethan continued, "you had vision, passion. I've followed your name in articles, white papers, but I always wondered what happened. Why someone like you wasn't leading her own team." Grant's stomach tightened. "I guess life happened," Helen answered, her tone more hesitant now. "Responsibilities, priorities shift, and some dreams get quieter." There was a pause. Then Ethan said, "Well, I'm building something small but important, and we're missing someone who sees the bigger picture, someone who understands both the system and the people inside it." Helen was still. "I think that someone might be you." Grant turned away before he could hear her answer. It felt like someone had reached into his chest and pressed down hard. He didn't understand it, not fully. Just hours ago, Helen was a fixture in his routine, no more personally considered than his morning black coffee or the spreadsheets she prepared without fail. Reliable, quiet, efficient. But now she stood in his mind like a figure in a fog, slowly coming into sharp, beautiful focus. And someone else had seen her first. On the plane ride back to Minnesota, the hum of the engines filled the silence between them. Grant sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the endless dark city lights flickering like distant stars below. Helen was beside him, a book in her lap unopened. Her hands rested gently on the cover, but her gaze was far away. She hadn't said much since the gala, and neither had he. But in her stillness, Grant sensed something shifting. Not anger, not distance, something more subtle, reflection. She had been seen, valued, invited into a future that wasn't tethered to his. And while he sat, battling his unspoken regrets, Helen seemed to be reaching back quietly toward the parts of herself she had silenced long ago. The ambitious grad student who challenged professors. The woman who once believed she could change systems, not just manage them. He glanced at her, almost involuntarily. The makeup was gone, replaced by her bare face, still radiant, but softer now. Her hair, pulled into a loose bun, glasses back on. She looked more like the Helen he knew, and yet she didn't. Something had changed. Not the way she looked, the way she carried herself. Helen was no longer shrinking into the role others had given her. She was remembering who she'd been before she decided she had to disappear. And somewhere deep in his chest, Grant felt the ache of missed chances settle into something heavier. Regret. But beside it, fear. Because now that he had finally seen her, truly seen her, he wasn't sure if she still belonged to his world. You're not just my secretary. You never were. But it might have been too late. It had been a week since the gala. The office moved as it always did, meetings, memos, the low hum of conversation down the corridor. But inside Grant Whitaker's corner office, something had shifted. Papers were stacked but untouched. The calendar beeped but went ignored, because something was missing. Helen. She had returned. Yes, but different. She still arrived early, still delivered his briefing binder with precision, but she no longer paused, no longer asked about his day, and she no longer looked him in the eye. She had become careful, measured, distant, but not cold, and Grant hated it. He hated that he had noticed too late, hated that he had nothing but silence to offer on the plane when her world had just cracked open. And most of all, he hated that someone else had seen her, really seen her before he had found the courage to. On Thursday afternoon, after too many restless nights and one draft email he never sent, Grant finally said the words, "Helen, could you step into my office? Please." She looked up from her desk, no expression, just a polite nod, as if she'd been expecting it. He stood when she entered, something he rarely did for anyone. He gestured toward the guest chair, but she remained standing, her back straight, hands gently clasped. He cleared his throat. "I won't take much of your time." She waited. Grant took a breath, searching for the right place to begin. There wasn't one. "I realized something last weekend, at the gala, and it's taken me a few days to sort out what to do with it." Helen gave a small nod, the kind that meant she was listening, but not necessarily agreeing. "I owe you an apology," Grant said, voice low, "for a lot of things. For not knowing your mother was ill, for not seeing how many times you stayed late to fix my mistakes, for never asking how you were doing, and for treating you like—" He paused, like background noise in my own life. Helen's expression softened, but only slightly. "You've been more than efficient. Helen, you've been the reason I survived the last few years. I didn't say it, but I saw it. In my way." "No," she said gently. "You saw the results, not the person." He flinched at the truth of it. "I thought I was being professional. Controlled. I told myself that was enough. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared to feel anything real after losing Caroline. And you." He paused. "Choosing carefully? You're real in a way I didn't know how to handle." Helen lowered her gaze. "You don't have to explain your grief to me, Grant. I respected it. I still do." "I'm not explaining," he said, stepping closer. "I'm finally being honest." A quiet beat passed between them. "I admire you," he continued. "Your insight, your steadiness, your compassion. You see people, you make things better without ever needing credit. That night, when I watched you speak with Ethan, I saw something in you that shook me. Not because it was new, but because it wasn't. It had always been there, and I just missed it." Helen let out a slow breath. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "You're saying all the right things, Grant?" "But," he asked, already knowing. "But—" She looked up, eyes clear and calm. If a person only becomes visible when someone else notices them first, then maybe that person was never truly seen at all. Her words hit harder than any accusation could have. Grant swallowed. "I deserve that." "This isn't punishment," she said gently. "It's perspective." He looked down, hands at his sides. The air between them felt heavier now, not with anger, but with the weight of honesty long withheld. "I've been offered a chance," Helen continued. to help build something, to contribute, not just support. With Ethan, he said quietly, yes. And are you going to take it? Helen didn't answer right away. I need time, she said. Time to think, to choose what I want next. For once, I want the choice to be mine. He nodded, slowly. Then take it, he said, but for what it's worth. Helen, if this is the last day I see you sitting outside that door, I'll regret not seeing you sooner for the rest of my life. Her face softened again, not with pity, but with peace. I'll let HR know tomorrow, she said. I'm not quitting yet. I'm just stepping away. She turned, fingers gently brushing the doorknob. Grant watched her, wanting to say something more. But this time, he understood that the silence mattered, too. Sometimes, when someone finally learns to speak their truth, the next right thing is to let the other person walk away free, not bound. Helen didn't look back, but as she stepped out into the hallway, her shoulders were lighter than they had been in years. And for the first time, Grant didn't feel in control. He only felt the quiet absence of someone who had once been invisible, and now, impossibly, out of reach. She left the office, but she took her voice with her and gave it to the world. Helen had never imagined herself in front of a microphone. Her world, for years, had been quiet. Keyboards, elevators, the hush of a copier at 6A, bam. Her voice, though calm and sure, had lived mostly in emails, in color-coded notes, and softly spoken updates just outside a glass-walled office. But that was before. Now, in a warm, sunlit co-working space tucked above a coffee shop in Minneapolis, her voice traveled farther than she ever had. Welcome to Healthwise Voices, she said, her breath steady. Today, we're talking about the people who hold healthcare together quietly, patiently, and often invisibly. It was her third podcast episode. And the first time she didn't feel like she was pretending. Ethan's startup had been a leap one, taken with trembling hands and no promises. But he had made something clear from the beginning. We don't need a secretary, Helen, we need a compass. She didn't fully understand what he meant until the meetings began, ones where she wasn't pouring coffee, but leading conversations. She helped design the editorial flow of the Healthwise blog, shaped its mission into something grounded and clear. Real voices, real care, real systems that worked because of the people no one ever quoted in press releases. She wrote slowly at first, tentatively. Her first piece, What No One Tells You About the Waiting Room, was a quiet reflection on sitting with her mother through long chemo sessions. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't technical, but it was honest. To her surprise, it struck a nerve. The comment section filled with notes from caregivers, front desk workers, even a hospital janitor who said, "Thank you for seeing us." Helen read each word 3 times. Then she cried, quietly, deeply, not from sadness, but release. The next few weeks moved in steady rhythm. She walked to work when the sidewalks weren't iced over, breathing in air that smelled faintly of roasting beans and distant snow. Her wardrobe, once confined to grays and navy blues, slowly welcomed in soft autumn tones, moss green, cranberry, oatmeal wool, still modest, still her, but no longer armor. She laughed more now. She called her sister back the same day instead of 3 days later. She sent her mother updates with photos, proud of the voice she was growing. And when Ethan asked if she'd be open to co-hosting a live discussion on invisible labor and care systems, she said yes, not because she was ready, but because she didn't want fear to be the only reason she said no. On a cool Friday evening, she stood at the front of a university auditorium with a headset mic clipped to her scarf. She was nervous, but not shrinking. And when the Q&A began, a middle-aged woman in the back raised her hand and said, "Your article helped me ask for the promotion I should have asked for 10 years ago. I just wanted to say thank you." Helen blinked, then nodded, her hand gently pressing to her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, voice breaking a little. "That means more than you know." The applause that followed was warm, earnest, She had never felt it before, not the kind that followed PowerPoints and boardroom approvals, but the kind that followed truth. That night, she returned home to her apartment with sore feet, a full heart, and a paper bag of takeout from her favorite Thai place. Her cat, Max, greeted her with his usual sleepy indignation, as if to say, "You're late, but I suppose I forgive you." She laughed, dropping her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. Her coat slid from her shoulders. She stretched, and then noticed the small brown box on her doorstep. No return address, just her name, Helen Moore, written in a sharp, familiar script. She didn't open it immediately. She sat with it for a while, hands wrapped around a mug of ginger tea, legs tucked beneath her on the couch. The lights of the city blinked outside, quiet and unbothered. When she finally lifted the lid, her breath caught. Inside was a hardcover book, wrapped in a linen sleeve, Healing Systems Essays from the People Behind the Curtain, compiled by Whitaker Medical Group. She recognized the title. It had been discussed internally for months, but she'd never seen a final version. On the title page, contributing editor, Helen Moore. She blinked, turned the page. Inside, nestled between chapters, was a single folded note. "Helen, I read your pieces. I listened to your voice. I see what I didn't have the eyes or heart to see before. You built the backbone of this company quietly, but now you're building something even stronger, your own voice. Whatever you do next, know this. You were never invisible, not to me, not anymore. Gee." She traced the edges of the page with her finger. No tears this time, just a stillness, a knowing. She closed the book and leaned back, the city still humming outside her window. The path ahead was still unfolding, but tonight, with a book in her lap, a candle flickering on the sill, and the memory of applause still ringing in her ears, she felt more herself than she ever had before. And somewhere, deep in the quiet places of her heart, she wondered what doors might open next. A leather notebook, a handwritten note. You were never just a secretary. It was still early morning when Helen sat down at her desk, the book from Grant beside her, unopened since the night she received it. The city hadn't quite woken up yet, and the first soft light of winter filtered through the blinds, casting pale golden stripes across her apartment floor. Next to the book, the brown envelope she had almost missed, thicker than the note inside the cover. She hadn't opened it the night before. Something about it felt heavier, not in weight, but in intention. With careful hands, she broke the seal and pulled out what looked like an old leather notebook, its edges worn, the spine softened from years of use. Inside, the first page bore the name Richard Whitaker, Grant's late father, and beneath it, a small note. In Grant's handwriting, "This belonged to my father. He built the company before I ever learned to tie a tie." In his later years, he wrote reflections about leadership, people, regret, hope. I didn't open this until after he passed. I wasn't ready to hear his voice again. But last week, I found something, a page with your name on it. And I knew. I had to share it with you. You were never just my assistant, Helen, not to him, and not to me. Helen's fingers trembled as she flipped through the aged pages, many filled with dense cursive, sketches of office floor plans, thoughts about hospital partnerships, and quotes from books. Then she found it, a page dated 3 years prior, titled simply Miss Moore. She reminds me of Margaret, quiet but unwavering, organized without ego. There's a stillness about her that keeps the place from tipping over when everything else shakes. I worry my son doesn't see her. Not really. He notices performance, but not presence. I hope he learns that real leadership isn't loud. It notices the quiet ones. Miss Moore is one of the rare ones. If she ever leaves, the loss won't be obvious at first, but it will be felt in the small things that stop working, the space that suddenly feels colder, the heart that goes missing when no one's watching. Helen stared at the ink, now slightly faded with time, and felt something in her loosen, not a tear, not a sob, but something deeper, a kind of exhale that reached all the way to her ribs. This wasn't a confession of love. It wasn't a plea to return. It was something harder to find, something she hadn't even known she'd been needing all these years. To be seen, truly seen, without having to ask. The rest of the day passed in a gentle haze. She answered emails, edited an article for the team blog, and walked to a nearby cafe to prep for a panel discussion. The sky outside was pale and overcast, and the air carried that December sharpness that bit just enough to keep you moving. But inside, she moved slower, still carrying the weight and warmth of that page. She thought of Grant, of his father, of the company she'd given 7 years of her life to. Quietly, steadfastly, while never once believing she might be remembered once she was gone. And now she was remembered. Not just remembered, valued, by the man who built the empire, and the son who nearly lost it all chasing its shadow. That evening, her calendar pinged with a soft chime, an email confirmation, subject line, Health Equity and Leadership, Winter Keynote Program. Finalization, she clicked. The message was from Ethan's assistant confirming that Helen had been officially added as a keynote speaker at the upcoming National Health Leadership Conference in Denver. Her panel, The Hidden Pillars. Unseen Labor in American Healthcare. Her first major stage. She stared at the screen, heart swelling, then scrolling through the agenda, and then she saw it, attendee list preview, just beneath the section for private donors and enterprise registrants. Whitaker Medical Group, G. Whitaker CEO. The air shifted. She wasn't sure if it was nerves or closure or something in between, but the sight of his name didn't cause her chest to tighten. It softened something, instead, because now she wasn't the one who waited by his door. She was the one with something to say, with something to stand for, and, whether he showed up to listen or not, she would speak anyway, for herself, for the quiet ones, for all the names mispronounced, roles overlooked, presence dismissed. This time, the room would hear her, that night, before bed. She opened the notebook again, not to the page with her name, but to another one, dated much earlier. It read, "Leadership isn't about power. It's about who you look at when no one's watching." Helen smiled, closed the book, and placed it gently on her nightstand, right beside her printed speech. This time, he wasn't on stage. He was just one quiet man in the back row listening. The ballroom ceiling soared overhead like the arch of a cathedral, gold-trimmed and silent before the crowd gathered. Rows of chairs filled steadily, murmurs rising and falling like soft waves. Lanyards swayed from necks, hands clutched coffee cups and notepads, and somewhere near the front row, someone adjusted the microphone. Helen stood just behind the curtain, her notes pressed flat against her palms, the pulse in her neck steady but insistent. This wasn't fear, not anymore, it was presence. "Please welcome Helen Moore," the moderator announced. There was polite applause, a few nods of recognition, nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, and that was just right. She stepped forward, in a navy blouse and tailored trousers, simple gold earrings, her hair half-pinned. She looked, as ever, like herself, but not the version that poured coffee or organized flight itineraries. This was the version who knew the weight of invisible labor, who had learned that the smallest hinges often swung the biggest doors. She took a breath and spoke. "I spent years," she began, voice steady, working in the background, managing calendars, anticipating needs before they were spoken, holding up systems that were praised publicly but privately ran on people like me. She paused, letting the truth hang in the air, not accusing, just telling. We called it support work, administrative, non-essential, but without it, the essentials couldn't function. She shared stories of nurses who missed meals to fill out patient files, of janitors who knew patients by name, of aides who remembered birthdays when no one else did. And then, she paused. "I'm not here today because I was promoted," she said. "I'm here because I stopped waiting to be seen." In the back row, Grant sat with his hands folded loosely in his lap. His suit jacket lay across the empty seat beside him. No name badge, no assistant, no fanfare, Just him, eyes steady, heart quiet. He didn't take notes, he just watched, noticing the way her shoulders rose as she breathed between points, the way her fingers danced ever so slightly when emphasizing something meaningful. The calm cadence of someone who wasn't performing but telling the truth of who she was. He felt it all settle in him, a quiet ache and a quiet joy. When the session ended, there was another round of applause, louder this time. A few people stood, others queued to meet her, hands outstretched, notebooks open for autographs, phones discreetly raised for photos. Grant waited, not in line, just nearby, not expecting anything, just hoping for a moment. When the crowd began to thin, Helen looked up and saw him. Not the CEO, not the man in the power suit, just Grant, in the quiet, waiting. They didn't speak right away. He nodded, she smiled, and then, in the soft lull between breakout sessions, he simply asked, "Would you like to take a walk?" Helen looked at him for a long breath, then nodded. The conference was hosted on the university campus where, coincidentally, Helen had studied during undergrad. The two of them walked slowly through the old brick pathways, past tall oaks shedding the last of their leaves. No destination, no agenda, just footsteps falling into rhythm, like they always had long before either of them realized it. "Your father," Helen said finally, "was a better writer than I expected." Grant chuckled softly. "He'd be pleased you said that. He always wanted to publish a book on leadership. Never got around to it." "You should do it," she replied. "Maybe not about leadership, maybe about noticing." He glanced sideways at her. "I think you'd be the better author on that one," he said. She didn't argue, but she didn't deflect either. The path curved around a reflecting pond, where a few ducks waded and students sat hunched over notebooks. It was the kind of quiet that carried a certain kind of gravity, unrushed, respectful. "I didn't come here expecting anything," Grant said at last. "I didn't want to interrupt your space." "You didn't," Helen said gently. He paused, watching a leaf swirl on the surface of the water. "I wanted to listen, not as your former boss, not even as someone hoping to fix what I broke, just as someone who finally understands what it means to see you." Her throat tightened, but not in pain, just recognition. The kind that happens when someone finally matches the weight of your silence with their own. She turned toward him. "You did see me today," she said quietly. "Thank you." They sat on a nearby bench, side by side, saying nothing for a while. There was no declaration, no grand apology, no rekindling of anything not yet defined, only the warmth of presence, of two people sharing the same space fully, honestly, for once, not bound by titles or history, just by understanding. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows on the pavement, Helen stood first. "I have a panel in 20 minutes, she said with a soft smile. Grant nodded, standing too. Of course. But before she turned to go, he gently touched her elbow. "If ever you want to walk again, no expectations, I'd like that." Helen held his gaze, then nodded, "Me too." And with that, she turned toward the auditorium, not walking away, just forward, with a lighter step and a heart finally, fully seen. "I came because you're the one person I don't want to miss again." The hotel lobby was quiet that morning. Snow flurries dusted the sidewalks beyond the glass doors, and the warmth inside felt like a soft blanket thick with stillness and unsaid words. Helen stirred honey into her tea. The teaspoon clinked softly against the ceramic, steady, measured, almost meditative. Her panel had ended an hour ago. The closing remarks had just wrapped, and soon the conference would dissolve into airport shuttles and unread emails. She wasn't expecting anyone to linger, certainly not him. But when she looked up, there he was, Grant. Wearing that familiar charcoal coat, hair dusted with snow, eyes softer than she remembered. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She nodded, motioning to the empty chair across from her. No hesitations now. Not anymore. They didn't start with small talk. No weather, no schedules, no meaningless fillers. Just silence that welcomed truth. And then Grant exhaled, leaning slightly forward. I came, he said slowly, because you're the one person I don't want to miss again. Helen watched him, her expression unreadable, but open. I know I don't deserve to say that, he added, not after everything I failed to notice. Not after all the years you spent making sure everything ran smoothly while I barely looked up. He shook his head. I used to think attention was a currency, that I could give it to people who earned it, or needed it, or helped the bottom line. I didn't know it was a language, one that said, you matter. Helen's fingers tightened around the cup, not out of anger, but because the words were hitting places she'd sealed off long ago. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I don't want to be the man who only realizes someone's worth when she's walking away. Helen was quiet for a long time, and then she smiled, a soft, sad, beautiful thing. I never wanted you to rescue me. Grant, she said, I just wanted you to see me while I was there. You were always there, he whispered. I just wasn't. They took their drinks outside. The snow had slowed, leaving behind a soft hush that blanketed the city in white and quiet. Sidewalks crunched beneath their boots as they walked side by side, no destination. Just the rhythm of two people choosing to share the same pace. Helen pulled her scarf tighter. You know, I used to fantasize about a moment like this. Grant turned to her, brows slightly raised. I used to imagine you showing up, finally noticing me, saying all the things I wanted to hear. She smiled again. But this time, it reached her eyes. And now that you have, I realize I don't need it the same way anymore. Grant nodded, a trace of pride in his expression. You've built something of your own now, he said. I've become someone I like, she replied. And that's why I'm here, he said. Not to offer you anything, not to ask you to come back, just to meet you here, in this version of you. They stopped walking at the edge of the campus park. The trees were bare, but not lifeless. Their branches reached skyward, still standing, still patient, like they knew spring would return in time. Helen turned to face him fully. I don't know what happens next, she said. I don't know if this is a beginning or just closure. Grant's eyes searched hers. I don't either, he said, but I know I'd like to keep walking. Not ahead of you, not behind, just beside you. There was no kiss, no sweeping music, just the quiet joining of two lives once parallel, now cautiously intersecting. No promises, no need for them, only presence and choice. Later that evening, Helen stood at her hotel window, looking out over the snowy rooftops. Her phone buzzed gently beside her messages from Ethan about the next podcast topic, a thank you note from the conference coordinator, and one unread message from Marcy. You looked happy today? Not dreamy happy, just grounded. I'm proud of you. Sis. Helen smiled and typed back, I feel seen. For the first time in a long time, I feel exactly where I'm supposed to be. Grant, meanwhile, returned to his apartment in Chicago, a space once sterile, now warming with signs of change. A framed photo of his father on the bookshelf. Helen's signed copy of her keynote speech on the desk. A single orchid by the window, living, growing, quietly beautiful. He sat down and opened his laptop. For the first time in months, he didn't check stock prices or emails. Instead, he wrote, not to Helen, not yet, just to himself. You missed her once. Don't miss her again. Love isn't urgency. It's awareness. It's choosing to look not when someone demands it, but when they don't. That's how you know it's real. He saved the document, and for the first time in years, slept with the window open, in another city, in another apartment. Helen placed her cup down, walked to the mirror, and let her hair down for the night. No audience, no one to impress, just herself. And she smiled, not for him, not for anyone watching, just because she could. Because, finally, after all this time, she had become the person no one could overlook again, not even herself. Sometimes, The quietest people hold the loudest truths. Helen's story reminds us that being invisible doesn't mean being unworthy. It simply means the world hasn't learned how to look properly. Too often, we measure people by what they do for us, not by who they are. We overlook those who support us silently, the assistant who stays late, the neighbor who checks in, the parent who sacrifices everything without asking for thanks. But love, dignity, and value aren't loud. They live in the background until someone finally listens. This story isn't just about missed chances in love. It's about seeing the overlooked, about honoring people while they're still around, about recognizing the strength in kindness, the courage in consistency, and the beauty in those who choose to stay, even when no one notices. So, today, ask yourself, who are the Helens in your life? Have you thanked them? Have you seen them? It's never too late to truly see someone, and it's never too late to let yourself be seen. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that speak to the soul. Your support helps us continue sharing voices that deserve to be seen and heard. From our hearts to yours, thank you.